Hello there everybody, and welcome to another video. Today we'll be checking out the RX 5500 XT and seeing how it stacks up to some 2026 gaming. Releasing back in December 12, 2019, this card retailed for about $169 as an entry-level option. Manufactured on the 7nm RDNA1 architecture, this card is clocked at 1647 MHz at base that while gaming will boost to 1733. The GDDR6 memory is running at 1750 MHz on a 128-bit memory bus. We've only got 4GB of VRAM for this model, but there are others that will carry 8. These series of cards marked the first use of PCIe 4.0 by AMD, even if this particular one is only on a by 8 interface. This card also only uses 130 watts of power, so we only need a single 8 pin to power it. For our video outputs, we've got 1 HDMI 2B and 3 DisplayPort 1.4As for all your high resolution or high frame rate needs. For rendering, we got DirectX 12.1, OpenGL 4.6, and Vulkan 1.4. We're only missing a feature level for DirectX here, but otherwise we are fully up to date. This card, and in fact this series actually, is in a kind of weird spot for driver updates. You may remember that fiasco a while back that AMD said the 5000 and 6000 series were going into maintenance mode, then walking it back saying game support will still be available. It was kinda weird, but for the meantime we still have up-to-date game optimized drivers ready for use, which is a point in its favor. But how does this all stack up into some real-world gaming? With our standard Ryzen test bench, let's see what this card can really do. Taking a look at the synthetic benchmarks, this is quite easily the most powerful card we've tested yet on the channel, which really isn't too much of a surprise considering how recently it released. With 1477.5 on Firemark and 4867 on TimeSpy, we are going to be primarily gaming at 1080p as always, but if you target some of those older titles that aren't quite as demanding, then 1440p should be achievable even on an entry-level card like this one, which is really cool to see. Once again, Capcom is showcasing just how good the RE engine can really be. The game auto-defaulted our settings to the lowest they can go, which is, understandable. It also went for FSR 1, but I did bump it up to 3 for this benchmark. The result is overall really good, with 116 FPS for our averages, with 80 and 29 for our lows. Even with our settings painfully low and FSR set to balanced, the game still looked absolutely amazing, and honestly, if you wanted to bump up the graphics a little bit and play at a 60 FPS cap, that's entirely doable as well. Just keep in mind how limiting the 4GB of VRAM really is. Granted, there's going to be more intensive scenes in the intro sequence I played here, but I doubt you'll have too bad of a time, even though we're using below recommended specs. Pragmata is following a similar suit here, the RE engine flexing its muscles to allow us to play a good looking game with a good frame rate. 1080p lowest here, just like with RE9, but we were able to bump up our FSR upscaling to the quality preset to maintain a bit of that visual clarity. 79 FPS average with 57 and 41 for the lows. It may not be as good as we had with RE9, but Pragmata is a much more open game, especially with some of those later areas, so it isn't too big of a surprise we're seeing lower frames here. Overall, I had little issue going through the intro, and it never dipped below 60 during gameplay. This is yet another one for Capcom and the brilliant RE engine. For those wanting some cheap Counter-Strike 2 gaming, you could certainly do a lot worse than the 5500 XT. 1080p high preset with ultra quality FSR enabled, this AI bot match in Mirage ran perfectly fine with a whopping 201 FPS average and 103 and 30 for the lows. Not even smoke grenades could keep us down, only dropping us towards 120 FPS, which is a noticeable drop, but we are only talking about a few milliseconds of frame time latency here. Maybe unacceptable for the big esports leagues, but more than enough for your average player. Considering how unoptimized Rivals can be, especially as an Unreal Engine 5 game, this certainly could have been a lot worse. Playing at 1080p with a mixture of low and medium settings, we've actually got a decent 62 FPS average with 44 and 34 for the lows. For having to use FSR balanced mode, I wish we could have eked out a bit more frames here, but on the other hand, for something not too far off the minimum recommended specs, I say we should count our blessings where we can. It is indeed still playable. I completed the spot match with little issues, but I would probably wait for a GPU upgrade if you want to do any serious competitive gaming on this game. For an actually playable Unreal Engine 5 co-op experience, Abiotic Factor has got you covered here. At 1080p medium, we've got through this little intro section pretty handily, with 100 FPS average and 72 with 68 for the lows. Don't let the old school Half-Life graphics fool you. This game is surprisingly intensive, as warned by the developers, as our framerate fluctuated anywhere from the 70s to 100s, and it's only going to be more prevalent in those more open areas like alien homeworlds. But it's good to know we're still getting a very playable experience, even if the game was asking for a 5600 XT as the minimum recommended specs. System Shock, being the stylized game that it is going to run pretty dang well on this card. Running at 1080p with a mixture of medium and high settings, we routinely saw around 151 FPS average with 108 and 19 for the lows. While we could push the settings to an all-high configuration, the game started hitching much more frequently. So a mixture of medium and high for consistency's sake is, at least in my opinion, much more preferable. Especially when the stylized graphics means that no matter the settings you use, you won't really have to worry too much about that visual fidelity. Overall, you should have very little trouble trying to take down Showdown. For those looking for a nice rhythm game, Dead as Disco is indeed playable here. You'll just have to take a bit of a hit to the graphics. Picking 1080p medium settings with FSR set to performance, we got a relatively stable 66 FPS average with 55 and 14 for the lows. Consistency is the key here, as you don't want wayward FPS spikes to mess up your timing, and these settings kept us over 60 FPS, so the input latency isn't too bad to compensate for. Sure, the game looks a little fuzzy, but you can still play quite comfortably with this graphics card. Being an early access title, it's not a big surprise that we see the first real loss for the 5500 XT. Subnautica 2 is still playable, but it feels kinda janky playing at below 60 FPS. Lowest settings of TSR set to the lowest it can go, we are just out of reach of a 60 FPS average with 52, with 30 and 12 for the lows. While the intro sequence wasn't too bad, actually exploring the world can drop us anywhere from the 50s to mid-30s. There were times I could physically feel the input latency, but I would still say it's kinda playable. Hopefully within time, they can optimize the game to run better, but if you really wanted to, you could still probably get your Subnautica fix here, even if you're better off playing the older games. If you want to dive into hell, you're gonna want to sacrifice quite a bit in the visuals department. 1080p with the lowest settings available, but with the render resolution set to quality, we did get a pretty nice 85 FPS average with 40 and 33 for the lows. The game does kinda look like you coated your glasses in Vaseline, and the frame times could be pretty sporadic depending on what's happening, but it is indeed playable. You could bump up a few of the settings and try to get that baseline 60 FPS, but with how chaotic the game can be, it's nice to give yourself a little bit of a buffer for those frame drops. Nothing says intensive quite like 4 simultaneous 360mm bombardments. Fortnite once again delivers pretty handily here, as long as we use performance mode, that is. Regular DX12 ran pretty alright, but in a competitive game where you'd want higher and more consistent frame rates, performance is the way to go. 1080p with a high preset, we saw upwards of 253 FPS average, Although while 53 and 17 for the lows seem pretty bad, once you're actually loaded into a match and get going, the frame rate was decently smooth. Playing through a couple games saw us hovering around that 200 to 300 FPS mark, which is a pretty large range to be swinging between, so for consistency's sake, maybe implementing a frame cap could do you some good. Honestly, I should have realized Hytale was a CPU-bound game first and foremost before recording this, but I did think the results were still pretty interesting nonetheless. 1080p medium net us a nice 96 FPS average, with 44 and 36 for the lows. While the frame times could be a little sporadic, it was definitely more than playable. What was really interesting was how this compared to the last GPU we tested, the 1050 Ti. Because while the 5500 XT is much more powerful, it overall performed a little bit worse, especially for those lows. This can't completely be the game being just CPU bound, as the CPU didn't change. So I wonder if Hytale doesn't just prefer Nvidia cards over AMD as well. Either way though, it's still a playable experience, and you should have a good time. Overall, while it has required quite a bit of visual loss having to constantly use lower settings and upscaling methods, the 5500 XT is actually still a really decent 1080p GPU in 2026. Granted, if you had the option between the 4GB model and the 8GB one, extra VRAM certainly wouldn't hurt. But with how the current prices are going on used GPUs nowadays, it may just be better to save the money. The 4GB models can be found on eBay for about $70 to $90, while the 8GB can be all the way up to $120 or even higher, which is pretty wild when cards like the 5700 XT could be had for just a little bit more money and would be a much better option for those trying to play modern titles on a budget. Sure, it's still 8GB of VRAM, but that GPU core will be much more powerful. But if you're looking at the 4GB 5500 XT, it still puts up a pretty valiant effort, and if you needed a card under $100, you could certainly do much worse. I would like to thank you all for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll be sure to see you all next time.